Part 1. The day he laughed at my past. He didn't even lower his voice when he said it. "Well, that's what happens when you peak early," my son-in-law chuckled, swirling his drink like he was in some cheap movie. A washed-up soldier living off old stories. The table went quiet. My daughter froze mid-breath. Her mother stared at her plate. Everyone else pretended to suddenly find the tablecloth fascinating. And me? I smiled, not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew something he didn't. You see, people like him always think they've won the moment they humiliate you in public. They confuse silence with weakness. They mistake calm for defeat. He had no idea that one small object, something I had carried through fire, blood, and loss, was sitting just a few feet away from him. And when I finally revealed it, his laughter would die in his throat. But before we get there, before the truth comes out and everything changes, let me take you back to how this all started and why I stayed quiet for so long. And if you enjoy powerful emotional stories about respect, karma, and quiet justice, make sure you subscribe to the channel now. These stories unfold piece by piece, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Because this wasn't just about an insult. It was about a man who thought the past didn't matter, and the moment he learned just how wrong he was. This is part 1, and trust me, the medal is only the beginning. To be continued. Part 2, the man he thought I was. I didn't always stay quiet. That night at the dinner table, when my son-in-law laughed and called me a washed-up soldier, something old stirred inside me. Not anger exactly, something heavier. A memory of who I used to be and why I learned to hold my tongue. Let me tell you who he thought I was. To him, I was just Mark, the quiet father-in-law who lived in a modest house on the edge of town. The man who drove an old pickup, fixed his own fence, and never talked about money. The man who showed up early to family events and left early too. No flashy stories, no big opinions. He thought I was harmless. What he didn't know was that silence had once saved lives. I grew up in a small industrial town where nobody expected much from you. My father worked in a steel mill until his lungs gave out. My mother cleaned offices at night. When I enlisted, people said it was because I had no other options. They were wrong. I joined because I wanted discipline, purpose, and because, deep down, I knew I could handle things most people couldn't. Basic training broke plenty of men. It didn't break me, it focused me. I learned quickly, listened carefully, and spoke only when necessary. Those habits followed me into combat zones where talking too much could get someone killed. I served in places most people only see in documentaries. Dust-filled villages, burned-out cities, nights where the sky glowed orange and sleep was a luxury. I saw courage and cowardice, sacrifice and betrayal, often in the same man. And I learned something crucial. The loudest people are rarely the strongest. Years later, when I came home, I didn't come back as a hero. I came back as someone who had learned how fragile life really was. I didn't crave attention. I didn't want applause. I wanted peace. That's how I met my wife. She never asked about medals or missions. She saw the man beneath the uniform, the one who flinched at fireworks, who checked doors twice before bed, who couldn't fully relax in crowds. She understood that some stories are carried, not shared. When she passed away years later, part of me went quiet forever. My daughter was still young then. I raised her alone, taught her values that had nothing to do with money or status, respect, integrity, accountability. And she grew into a strong woman, which is why it surprised me when she married him. From the start, my son-in-law loved talking about success. his business deals, his network, his future. He measured worth in numbers, salary, square footage, brand names. To him, I was an uncomfortable reminder that life existed outside his bubble. At first, his jabs were subtle. Must be nice not worrying about ambition anymore. Back in your day, things were simpler, huh? Guess the military teaches you to follow orders, not think big. I let it go, not because I agreed, but because I didn't need his approval. That night at dinner, though, he crossed a line. Calling me washed up wasn't just disrespectful, it was dismissal. A way of saying my life, my sacrifices, meant nothing in the present. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't staying quiet out of weakness. I was waiting for the right moment. Waiting for him to say just enough. Waiting for the truth to matter. Because some things don't need to be announced. They need to be revealed. And when they are, they change how everyone in the room breathes. In part 3, I'll tell you about the call I received the very next morning, and why it forced my hand sooner than I expected. The past doesn't stay buried forever. It resurfaces when it's needed most. To be continued. Part 3, the call that changed the timeline. The phone rang at 6:17 a.m. I remember the exact time because I'd already been awake for an hour, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee growing cold in my hands. Old habits die hard. Even years after service, my body still woke before sunrise, alert for a threat that no longer existed. When I saw the caller ID, my jaw tightened. It was a number I hadn't seen in over a decade. I didn't answer right away. Some calls don't belong to the present. They pull you backward, into a life you've carefully folded away. I stared at the screen as it rang again and again, until finally I exhaled and picked up. "Mark," the voice said. "Older now, rougher, but unmistakable. It's been a long time." I closed my eyes. "Yeah," I replied. "It has." This wasn't a friend calling to catch up. This wasn't a casual check-in. Men like him didn't call unless something mattered. "I need to see you," he said. "Today." I glanced toward the hallway, where my daughter's childhood photos still hung. Soccer trophies, school portraits, a life I'd built deliberately, quietly after everything else ended. "What's this about?" I asked. There was a pause on the other end, a heavy one. "It's about something you earned," he said, "and something that was buried." I knew then this wasn't just about the past. It was about the truth finally catching up. We met at a small office near the Veterans Hospital. Neutral ground. He was already there when I arrived, standing stiffly despite the cane leaning against the wall. Time had been unkind to his body, but his eyes were still sharp. They always were. After a brief handshake, he gestured for me to sit. No small talk, no catching up. That's how it used to be, too. "You saw the news?" he asked. I shook my head. "Good," he said. "Then let me explain." He slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were documents, official seals, dates, signatures, names I hadn't seen in years, places I hadn't thought about in a long time, and at the center of it all, my own, my full name, typed in bold. "What is this?" I asked, though part of me already knew. He leaned back slowly. An investigation that was reopened. New testimony. Declassified reports. I flipped through the pages, my fingers steady even as my chest tightened. "They're correcting the record," he continued. "What happened on that operation? The one they called a failure." Failure. That word burned. I remembered that night vividly. The ambush, the chaos, the radio going dead. The choice I made in seconds that saved 6 men and cost us everything else. The way the story was twisted afterward to protect people higher up the chain. I'd never fought it. Some battles weren't worth the collateral damage. Until now. They're recommending formal recognition, he said carefully. The highest level. I looked up at him sharply. No, I said. That's not why you're here. He met my gaze. You're right. He slid one last document toward me. A schedule, a date, a location, a ceremony, and a line that made my stomach drop. Next of kin invited. You didn't tell anyone? I asked. Not yet, he replied. But the list will go public in 48 hours. 48 hours. I thought of the dinner table, the laughter. The word washed up, tossed so casually, like a joke that didn't matter. I thought of my daughter, how proud she was of her husband's ambition, how little she knew about what her father had done, or why he'd chosen never to speak of it. I didn't want this, I said quietly. I know, he replied, but sometimes recognition isn't about what you want. It's about what history owes. I left the office feeling heavier than when I'd entered. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't vindication. It was exposure. And exposure changes dynamics. By the time I got home, my phone buzzed with a text from my daughter. Dinner tonight? Mark says he wants to clear the air. I stared at the message for a long time. The air didn't need clearing. The truth needed room. I typed back a simple reply. I'll be there. That evening, as I stood in front of the bathroom mirror adjusting my jacket, I noticed my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. Because for the first time in years, silence was no longer an option. And once the truth steps into the light, everyone has to adjust their story. In part 4, I'll tell you what happened at that dinner, and the moment my son-in-law realized he'd underestimated the wrong man. To be continued. Part 4. The dinner where everything shifted. The house was louder than usual. Laughter spilled from the dining room before I even stepped inside. The clink of glasses and the hum of confident voices bouncing off the walls. My daughter had always loved hosting, candles, music, perfectly arranged plates. Tonight was no different. If anything, she'd gone all out, as if atmosphere alone could smooth over the tension from our last meeting. Mark spotted me first. There he is, he said, standing halfway from his chair. The man of the hour. The phrase landed wrong. Too cheerful. Too performative. I nodded politely and took the seat my daughter pulled out for me. She kissed my cheek, her smile warm but cautious, like someone approaching a fragile truce. I'm really glad you came, Dad, she said. So am I replied, and meant it. Mark raised his glass. To family, he said. And fresh starts. We echoed the toast, but I noticed his eyes flick toward me before he drank. He was watching, measuring, trying to decide which version of me he was dealing with tonight, the quiet retiree, or the man he'd dismissed so easily. Dinner began smoothly enough. Small talk, work updates. Mark spoke at length about a new expansion deal, numbers rolling off his tongue like a practiced script. My daughter listened with admiration. I listened with silence. At some point, Mark leaned back and smiled. So, he said casually, Dad, you still teaching fitness classes? The word still did its work. Yes, I answered. A few mornings a week. Hey, nothing wrong with that, he said, chuckling. Staying busy is important at your age. My daughter shot him a look. Mark! What? He said, shrugging. I mean, it's great. Keeps him active. I met his eyes, calm, unreactive. Activity isn't the same as purpose, I said evenly. His smile tightened. True, though some of us aim a little higher. There it was again. The subtle blade. I set my fork down slowly. You always speak in hierarchies, I said. Have you noticed that? The table went quiet. Mark laughed lightly. I speak in reality. Some paths just lead further. Further where? I asked. He gestured vaguely. Success, legacy, security. I nodded. And you think that's measured how? His confidence returned instantly. Influence, assets, recognition. I leaned back in my chair. Interesting. My daughter frowned slightly. Dad, where is this going? Nowhere, I said gently. I'm just listening. Mark took another sip of wine. Look, I don't mean any disrespect. I admire discipline, but let's be honest. Some people peak early. Others never peak at all. The room felt colder. I could have corrected him then. I could have ended it with one sentence. I didn't. Because timing matters. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. Not to show anything. Just to place it on the table, face down. Mark noticed immediately. You expecting an important call? He asked, a smirk creeping in. Not important, I replied. Just inevitable. He laughed. I like that confidence. The main course arrived. Conversation tried to resume, but something had shifted. My daughter sensed it. So did Mark. He was suddenly more animated, more eager to dominate the room, as if instinctively trying to regain control. So, Dad, he said again, louder this time, you ever regret not pushing harder, going further? I looked at him, really looked. Regret? I repeated. No. That surprises me, he said. Most men your age have a list. I chose when to stop, I said. That's different. Mark raised an eyebrow. From what? From being stopped. Before he could respond, my phone buzzed. Once, then again. I picked it up calmly. My daughter's eyes followed the movement. Is everything okay? Yes, I said. Actually, this is the call I was expecting. Mark scoffed lightly. Must be your gym buddies. I stood. Excuse me, I said. This will only take a minute. I stepped into the hallway and answered. Yes, I said quietly. I understand. Pause. I'll be there. I ended the call and returned to the dining room. Mark looked annoyed. Everything all right? I picked up my jacket. I'm afraid I have to leave. My daughter stood immediately. Dad, you just got here. I know, I said softly. But tomorrow is going to be busy. Mark smirked. Still mysterious, huh? I met his gaze, steady and unblinking. Mark, I said, have you ever had a story told about you that wasn't true? He blinked, caught off guard. What? Something that defined you publicly, I continued, while the truth stayed hidden. He shrugged. Can't say I have. I nodded. That makes sense. I turned to my daughter and kissed her cheek. I love you, I said, no matter what happens next. She looked confused. What's happening next? I paused, then answered honestly. Clarity. As I walked out, I felt it, the moment the balance tipped. Mark didn't know it yet. My daughter didn't either. But the ground beneath them had already started to shift. Because in less than 24 hours, a name they thought they knew would appear in a place neither of them expected. And once it did, there would be no more room for assumptions. In Part 5, the announcement goes public and the word washed up disappears from the conversation entirely. To be continued. Part 5 when the past refused to stay quiet. The announcement went live at exactly 9:06 a.m. No countdown, no dramatic music, just a government press release uploaded to a plain white page, one of those updates most people scroll past without a second glance. But not Mark. By 9:04 a.m. my phone rang. It wasn't my daughter. It was him. I let it ring. At 9:07 my daughter called. "Dad," she said, breathless. "What is this?" "Your name, it's everywhere." I closed my eyes for a moment. "So you saw it," I said. She didn't answer right away. I knew you served, but this. Her voice wavered. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't something I did alone," I replied, "and it wasn't something I needed recognition for." There was silence on the line. Then she said quietly, "Mark is shaken." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Good," I said, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just honestly. Within hours, the story spread. Local news first, then national. A once classified operation re-evaluated. A soldier whose actions saved multiple lives under impossible conditions. A recommendation upgraded after years of buried evidence. The word hero appeared more than once. I didn't read the comments. I didn't watch the interviews. But Mark did. Every single one. When he showed up at my door that afternoon, he wasn't angry. He was pale. "I didn't know," he said immediately, voice tight. "I swear I didn't know." I stepped aside and let him in. He looked around my living room like it was a different place now. The same furniture, the same quiet. But his posture had changed. Shoulders tight, confidence replaced by calculation. "They're talking about a ceremony," he continued. "A medal." I nodded. "Yes, the Medal of Honor," he said, barely above a whisper. There it was, the thing he never expected. Part 6, the day silence broke. The ceremony was scheduled for Friday morning. Official, formal, unavoidable. An envelope arrived at my door 3 days before it, thick, cream-colored, stamped with a seal most people only ever see on television. Inside was the itinerary, the dress code, and one line that mattered more than the rest. Immediate family invited. I stared at it for a long time, not because I felt honored, but because I knew what it would force. Silence had protected my family for years. Now truth was about to walk into a room full of cameras, uniforms, and witnesses. And not everyone was ready. My daughter came over that evening. She didn't sit right away. She paced the living room like she used to as a teenager when she had something difficult to say. "Mark doesn't want to go," she finally admitted. I nodded. I had expected that. "He says it will make him look small," she continued. "That everyone will compare him to you." I looked at her carefully. "Do you see him as small?" She stopped pacing. "No," she said slowly. "I see him as exposed." That was the word. Exposure doesn't humiliate on its own. It just removes the mask. The night before the ceremony, Mark called me. Not texted. Called. That alone told me this wasn't about image anymore. "I don't know where I belong tomorrow," he said. No sarcasm, no bravado, just uncertainty. "You belong wherever honesty puts you," I replied. He was quiet. "I spent my whole life building a version of myself people would admire," he said. "And one comment destroyed it. One comment revealed it," I corrected. "That's different." He exhaled sharply. "I don't know how to fix this." "For once," I said, "don't try." The morning of the ceremony, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie. I barely recognized the man looking back at me, not because of the suit or the medals, but because of the weight in his eyes. Not pride, responsibility. At the venue, rows of uniforms filled the hall. Decorations were precise, flags perfectly aligned, everything polished. Mark and my daughter arrived together but didn't sit close. She held her hands folded in her lap. He stared straight ahead. When my name was announced, the room stood. The sound of chairs moving in unison was louder than applause. I walked forward slowly. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because I knew people were finally seeing a version of me that had always existed. As the citation was read, I heard gasps in the audience. Details never shared publicly. Decisions made under fire. Lives saved at a cost no one wanted to calculate. I didn't look at Mark. I didn't need to. I felt him. After the medal was placed around my neck, I returned to my seat. Mark didn't clap right away. Then he did, slowly, deliberately. Not for show, for understanding. After the ceremony, reporters tried to approach me. I declined politely. This wasn't their story. In the hallway, Mark stood alone. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He nodded. "That wasn't what I expected," he said. "Oh, what were you expecting?" I asked. "Power," he admitted. "Status. Something loud." I shook my head. "This isn't loud. It's heavy." He swallowed. "I see that now." We stood there for a moment. Not reconciled, not broken, just honest. That evening my daughter spoke. Not to me, to him. "I don't need you to compete with my father," she said quietly. "I need you to respect him, and yourself." Mark nodded. "I don't know if I know how," he said. She met his eyes. "Then learn." That night, after everyone left, I placed the medal back in its case. Not on a shelf, not on display, where it belonged, because the medal wasn't the point. The point was that silence no longer carried the burden alone. And in Part 7, Mark will face the hardest test of all. Not from the public, but from the woman he married. Because admiration can be faked. But respect demands change. Part 7, the conversation he couldn't control. The house was quiet that night. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that presses against your ears, forcing you to hear your own thoughts. Mark sat at the dining table long after dinner, his jacket draped over the back of the chair, his tie loosened but not removed. He'd replayed the ceremony in his head a dozen times already. Every word, every pause, every look. Especially the look on my daughter's face. She hadn't cried. She hadn't smiled. She had watched, and that scared him more than applause ever could. When she finally came into the room, she didn't sit right away. She poured herself a glass of water. Her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were bracing herself for something heavy. "We need to talk," she said. Mark nodded quickly. "I know I was going to—" "No," she interrupted gently. "Let me finish first." That alone unsettled him. He was used to steering conversations, shaping outcomes with confidence and charm. Tonight, neither worked. "I saw you today," she continued. "Not the version you show people. The one underneath." Mark swallowed. "I was out of line before. I know that now." "That's not enough," she replied calmly. He frowned. "What do you mean?" She finally sat across from him. "You didn't just insult my father. You insulted the values he built our family on, and you did it casually like it didn't matter." "I apologized," he said quickly. She shook her head. You apologized because you were embarrassed, not because you understood. The words landed hard. Mark leaned back, rubbing his temples. I didn't grow up around people like him, he said. I learned to survive by proving myself. And you proved yourself by tearing others down? She asked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Silence stretched between them. For years, she went on, I defended you. I told myself you were ambitious, driven, misunderstood. But tonight I realized something. What? He asked quietly. You don't know how to respect what you can't measure. He looked up sharply. My father's worth isn't in a title, she said. It's in what he did when no one was watching. And today the world finally saw it. Mark's voice dropped. And where does that leave me? She held his gaze. That depends on what you're willing to change. Mark didn't sleep that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments he'd brushed off for years, the jokes, the subtle digs, the way he'd enjoyed feeling superior. For the first time, he saw them through her eyes. They didn't look clever. They looked cruel. The next morning, he did something unexpected. He showed up at my house, not with excuses, not with explanations, just with humility. I don't know how to say this properly, he said, as soon as I opened the door. So I'll say it plainly. I was wrong. I waited. I built my identity on being the smartest man in the room, he continued. Yesterday I realized I wasn't. I nodded once. That's a start, he exhaled. I don't expect forgiveness, I just don't want to be that man anymore. I studied him carefully. Change isn't in words. It's in discomfort. And he looked uncomfortable in a way I hadn't seen before. You don't need to impress me, I said. You need to listen. And keep listening when it stops being convenient. He nodded slowly. I will. That evening, my daughter came by again. She looked at Mark, then at me. I'm not asking you to choose sides, she said to him. I'm asking you to grow. Mark reached for her hand, tentative. I'm trying. She squeezed his fingers. Trying isn't enough, but it's where we start. Later, when they left, I stood alone in the living room. The medal case sat closed on the shelf. I didn't look at it, because the real test wasn't behind me. It was unfolding quietly in a marriage, learning the difference between admiration and respect. And in part 8, that difference will demand a decision neither of them can delay any longer. Because some truths don't just change how we see others. They change what we're willing to tolerate. Part 8, when respect finally had a cost. Change doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in moments, small, uncomfortable moments that demand a choice. For Mark, those moments came quickly after the conversation with my daughter. At first, he tried to be careful. He listened more. He interrupted less. He even asked questions, real ones, not the kind meant to steer the answer where he wanted it to go. But respect, when it's new, feels heavy to people who've never carried it before, and that weight began to show. A week after the ceremony, they were invited to a dinner with Mark's colleagues, investors, partners, the same people who once laughed easily at his jokes and praised his confidence. This time the tone was different. Someone mentioned the medal, not casually, not dismissively, with awe. That kind of honor, one man said, it's rare. Changes how people see a family. Mark felt the eyes turn toward him, waiting, measuring. For once, he wasn't the center. He smiled stiffly. Yes, he said. My father-in-law earned it. There it was. No joke. No qualifier, no deflection. My daughter noticed immediately. So did he. It cost him something. Later that night in the car, he exhaled sharply. I felt invisible. She looked at him. That's how my father felt when you mocked him. The words weren't sharp. They were honest. And honesty, when it lands, doesn't bruise, it exposes. Mark's discomfort followed him home. He began noticing things he'd ignored before. The way people listened more carefully when he spoke less. The way authority didn't always belong to the loudest voice. The way respect couldn't be demanded, only earned. And earning it was slow, painfully slow. One evening, he sat across from my daughter and admitted something he'd never said out loud. "I don't know who I am if I'm not impressive," he said. She reached across the table. "Then this is where you find out." Not everyone survives that moment. Some people double down. Some retreat into bitterness. Mark stood at the edge of that choice for days. Then he did something unexpected again. He declined an opportunity, a lucrative one, a speaking engagement where he would have been introduced as the visionary husband of a decorated hero. Old Mark would have accepted instantly. New Mark shook his head. "I didn't earn that," he said. "And I won't borrow it." When my daughter told me, I didn't react. I simply nodded, because that was the first real sign of change. One afternoon, Mark asked if he could walk with me. Just the two of us. We didn't talk much at first. The rhythm of footsteps filled the space where words usually fought for control. Finally, he spoke. "I spent years thinking respect came from being untouchable," he said. But watching you, I realized it comes from being accountable." I stopped walking, looked at him. "You're learning," I said. "That doesn't mean you've arrived." He nodded. "I know." We continued on. That night my daughter told me something quietly. "I'm not sure where this marriage will end up," she said. "But for the first time I feel like I'm choosing, not enduring." I smiled softly. "That's all anyone can ask for," I said. The medal stayed where it was. The past stayed where it belonged. And something new, fragile, uncertain, but honest, began to take shape. But in part 9, one final test will come. Not from Mark's pride, not from public opinion, but from a moment that forces him to choose between who he was and who he's willing to become. Part 9, the moment that couldn't be rehearsed. The invitation arrived without warning. Not by email, not through contacts, by mail. Mark stood in the doorway holding the envelope like it weighed more than paper ever should. He didn't open it right away. He already knew what it was. An exclusive industry summit, private audience, limited seats, the kind of event that once defined him. Inside was more than an invitation. It was a return ticket to the version of himself that had ruled his life for years. He placed it on the table and stared at it long after my daughter had gone to bed. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about networking. This was about identity. The summit promised visibility, panels, press recognition, and buried deep in the program was his name, listed not just as a guest, but as a featured speaker. The title beneath it read, "Reinventing Leadership Through Legacy." The irony almost made him laugh. Almost. Because the proposal came with conditions, unspoken but clear. He would be introduced as the son-in-law of a decorated war hero. His story would be framed around proximity, not merit. Borrowed gravity. Old Mark would have seen it as smart branding. New Mark saw it as theft. He came to my house the next morning. No announcement, no pretense, just honesty. They want me back, he said, but not as who I am now. I nodded. They rarely do. He ran a hand through his hair. If I go, everything stabilizes. My reputation, my standing, our future. And if you don't, I asked. He exhaled. Then I keep falling, slowly, quietly. I looked at him carefully. This isn't a test, I said. It's a mirror. He met my eyes. I don't know which reflection I can live with. That afternoon, my daughter joined us. She listened, didn't interrupt. When Mark finished explaining, she asked one question. Would you be proud of yourself afterward? He opened his mouth, then closed it. No, he said quietly. She nodded. Then don't ask me to be. The deadline came at midnight. Mark sat alone in his study, the acceptance link glowing on his laptop screen. Just one click. No consequences anyone would see. No one would blame him. People would praise the move. But some decisions don't echo publicly. They echo inward. At 11:58 p.m., he closed the laptop. He wrote a short response instead. Polite, professional, declining. No explanation. When he sent it, something inside him loosened. Not relief, alignment. The fallout was immediate. Calls went unanswered. Opportunities evaporated. Whispers replaced conversations. But something else happened too. People who had never mattered before started listening, not to his polish, to his restraint. Weeks later, a junior associate reached out, not to network, to ask advice. I heard you turned something big down, the message read. Why? Mark thought carefully before replying. Because answers shape identity. Finally, he wrote, because I didn't want to win by standing on someone else's shadow. That evening we sat together, quiet, unremarkable, honest. Mark didn't try to impress me. He didn't try to explain himself. He simply said one thing. I don't know where this path leads. I nodded. That's how you know it's yours. Some people spend their lives rehearsing who they want to be. Others are forced into a moment they can't rehearse. That moment reveals everything. And in part 10, final, the story doesn't end with applause or punishment. It ends with something rarer, a man choosing integrity when no one is watching, and a legacy that finally speaks for itself. Part 10, what remained after the noise. Final part. Life didn't reward Mark for his choice, not immediately. There were no headlines praising his integrity, no sudden resurgence of respect from the circles he'd stepped away from. In fact, for a while, things became quieter than ever, too quiet for someone who had once thrived on attention. And yet, that silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was clean. Mark found himself rebuilding from a place he'd never started before, humility. He took on consulting work that didn't carry his name in bold letters. He showed up early, listened more than he spoke, and learned to accept being the least impressive person in the room. And strangely, that's when people began trusting him. Not because he was loud, not because he was connected, but because he didn't perform. My daughter watched the change carefully. She didn't rush forgiveness. She didn't celebrate transformation. She waited. One evening, months later, she said something simple. You're different, she told him. Mark didn't smile. He didn't argue. He said, I hope so. That was enough. As for me, the medal stayed in its case. Not hidden, not displayed. Present. Because the honor was never meant to overshadow anyone else's life. It existed to remind, not impress. Occasionally, someone would ask about it. I answered briefly. Then I changed the subject. One afternoon, Mark and I walked the same route we'd taken months before. No tension, no unspoken challenge, just conversation. I used to think respect came from being untouchable, he said. Now I think it comes from being accountable. I nodded. That's the kind you can live with. He stopped walking. I don't think I ever thanked you, he said. For what? I asked. For not humiliating me when you could have. I looked at him. Humiliation teaches nothing, I said. Clarity does. He absorbed that quietly. At home that night, my daughter placed a framed photo on the shelf. It wasn't the medal. It was a picture of the three of us. No ceremony, no audience. Just a candid moment from a walk by the river. That's what I want to remember, she said. So did I. People still talk about strength as if it has to be proven, as if it demands recognition. But real strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It waits. It listens. And when it finally speaks, it does so once, clearly, and without apology. Mark called me a washed-up soldier. What he learned, slowly, painfully, honestly, was that some lives don't peak. They endure, and that endurance is its own kind of victory.